All right, so this morning we are going to start on the female reproductive system. And we'll start out with the reproductive anatomy. And we're going to start with the internal anatomy first, or what we can call the internal genitalia. So one of the most prominent features of the internal genitalia of the female reproductive system is the ovary. What you're looking at here is a cross-section through one of the ovaries. Now, the ovary, which is going to be our site for production of the female sexual gamete, which is called the ovum, it's going to be set in the ovarian fossa on the posterior pelvic wall. So on that posterior pelvic wall, there's a small indentation, and that's where the ovary is going to be set in place. Now, around the external surface of the ovary is encapsulated. And it's encapsulated by a structure called the tuna of Vaginal. And really what it means is the white layer. Then just below this encapsulation, we have a cortex and a medulla. So we have layers of tissue below the encapsulation. And so you can see medulla here in the middle and then cortex here on the outside. You'll see that the cortex is very cellular, lots of cells there. The medulla, let's start from the inside and work our way out. The medulla, this is our inner layer. It is fibrous and contains primarily blood supply. So connective tissue and then also the arteries and the veins that bring blood into the ovarian tissue. The cortex, I've already said that the cortex is very much cellular. The cortex is actually going to be the location of the ovarian follicles. Basically, this is where the ovum is going to be produced, encapsulated in this thing called a follicle that protects the ovum and supplies the nutrients and waste removal for the ovum as it goes through its development, and then it's going to help facilitate the ovulation or the release of the ovum to be picked up into other portions of the reproductive system. Now, I guess we're going to come back and we're going to talk more about this, but just to kind of keep the terminology on track here, the ovarian follicle is not referring to the ovum. The ovum is a part of the ovarian follicle. The ovum is the cell that contains 23 chromosomes that will be fertilized by the sperm. The follicle is the ovum and everything else, all the other cells that support it. Those are going to be granulosa cells making up ovarian follicle, sometimes also referred to as the Graafian follicle. Okay, so from the ovary, here's our ovary again, cross-section on this side, no cross-section on this side. We have the uterus, the oviducts, and then the vaginal canal. From the ovary, the oviducts would be the next prominent structure. The oviduct has a variety of different names. Oviducts are most appropriate. You may also know them as the fallopian tube, which is an Eponym, that's some guy's name. So we don't use that as readily anymore. Sometimes they're referred to as the uterine tubes, the uterine horns. Seriously, the rabbit's ears. No, not really the rabbit's ears. But whenever I draw a uterus, it looks kind of like a rabbit. So we're going to go with the oviducts. And this is a duct, a tube that runs between the ovary and the uterus. And this is going to carry the ovulated ovum. This is also where fertilization will occur, which we've already briefly talked about. So the ovum's released, it's swept into this first initial section of the oviduct and runs through 3 additional sections on its way to the uterus and can be fertilized or not fertilized in the oviduct. If it's not fertilized, it's not probably going to be fertilized elsewhere. If it is fertilized, it will continue its path to the uterine lining where it will implant. So these 3 sections that you need to know on the ovary end. Oh, look at that. Kathy Brooks is sending me an email. Let me turn my email off. Oh, we love her so much. She's the only one who made this class tolerable. We hate you, Dr. Bowen. So on the ovary end of the oviduct, we have a section that's known as the infundibulum. And the infundibulum is highlighted as being a widened portion of the tube. And it also has these finger-like projections, and you can see them really well on this side of the figure, slightly on this side of the figure as well. These are a fine finger-like structure or projection. They are called fimbriae. When the ovary ovulates an ovum, those finger-like projections are stimulated to contract and to kind of create a sweeping motion, and this helps to direct that ovum into the oviduct rather into the abdominal pelvic cavity. From here, we go to the middle section. The middle section is known as the ampulla. So here's our middle section. This is the longest section. And this is most likely where fertilization would occur. Would be as the ovum travels through this portion of the uterine tube. And then we get to the uterus side, where the uterine end, and where it empties into or enters into the uterus, this is going to be the isthmus. Which isn't that like the end of a canal, like the boats go through the isthmus? Isthmus. Okay, so from the oviduct or the uterine tube, the fallopian tube, the uterine horn, we enter into the uterus. And the uterus, it's layers of tissue. The most prominent tissue is smooth muscle, so I'm going to call this a muscular chamber. So it is a muscular chamber. It is also going to have a lining, the uterine lining, also known as the endometrium, that is going to be a very fertile environment. And when I say fertile, I mean it provides plenty of nutrients and waste removal capabilities for fetal development. Its overall shape is going to be pear-shaped. would be an upside down pear, but it has an overall pear shape. And within this pear shape, we have a superior, a middle, and then an inferior portion. The superior is going to be called the body or the fundus, which fundus is a term that we've run into before that is just a descriptor of a body of an organ such as the stomach. The stomach also has its fundus, which is the main body of the stomach. The middle portion is the corpus. So fundus up here, corpus here, and then we have this region at the very inferior end, which is an opening into the vaginal canal, and that's going to be the cervix. Now there's a hole through the cervix, an opening that enters into the vaginal canal, coming through the vaginal canal towards the uterus, through the cervix, it's the external os, OS. Coming from the uterine side, it would be the internal os, or internal OS. Now, without a pregnancy, the chamber is closed. So if the chamber is closed under normal physiological conditions, does anyone happen to remember what we would call that? Potential space. So the normal physiology is for there to be a potential space. And then obviously with pregnancy, it's going to grow and enlarge with the growth of the fetus. Now again, the cervix.
Isn't that what I measured in
What?
What dial?
During not pregnancy, but during the birthing process is maybe what you're referencing. We talk about dilation and effacement. And dilation is basically the cervical opening getting bigger, and effacement is the thinning out of the tissue. Now they do make a measurement from basically top of the pubis up towards the, I think it's the xiphoid process. They basically measure the bulge, and that correlates to normal baby growth and everything like that. So the cervix contains the cervical canal. We've already talked about the openings. One side of the cervical canal is the internal os, the other side is the external os. And this cervical canal leads to the vaginal cavity. All right. I've already said that the uterus had several different layers. In fact, there are 3 layers. The endometrium is going to be the internal layer. We're going to have a muscular layer in the middle, which is called the myometrium, and then we're going to have our external layer. What do you think the external layer is going to be? Yep. We're going to have the perimetrium. So perimetrium, which is outside, myometrium will be our middle layer, and this is smooth muscle. And then the very inner layer is going to be the most dynamic layer. It's called the endometrium, and I mean dynamic because it actually changes in thickness depending on time of the month, where you are within a uterine cycle. Histologically, the myometrium is the most interesting from a histological perspective. Myometrium is just going to be smooth muscle, and then the perimetrium is going to be connective tissue, just kind of coating the outside of the organ. The endometrium, though, has 2 additional layers. So as you expect, we should call them both stratum, because that's going to be a layer. And we have one that's the stratum basalis, and this is going to be the portion of the endometrium that's actually regenerated. So this is going to be the regenerated endometrium after menstruation. Well, I'm sorry. You know, I don't really mean regenerated, I mean regenerating. It's going to be the regenerating endometrium after menstruation. So this is basically going to be the root. It's going to help to reproduce and re-thicken the endometrial lining. And that endometrial lining is going to be the stratum functionalis. And the stratum functionalis, these are the cells, are composed of the cells that slough during menstruation. And uterine sloughing is the proper scientific medical term. Sloughing, like you slough something off. It's slough. Yeah, this is going to be the slough. No, it's going to slough. Slough. Did someone just say that's disgusting? Shame on you. I think that there are a lot of other things in human physiology that are way more disgusting, like the end of the digestive system.
I would rather you say sloth. Sloth. I can't even say it, but.
Slough. Here, this is how you pronounce it. Slough during menstruation. Okay, so back to an overall picture here. The vaginal cavity, or the vaginal canal, or just simply the vagina, this is a multi-purposed organ. It is going to be responsible for the birthing process as the birth canal. We expel the infant or the baby out of the uterus through uterine contraction and slide it through the vaginal canal in that birthing process. It will also allow for discharge of the menstrual fluid after it's been sloughed from the uterine cavity. Then it's also going to be the organ for sexual intercourse. So overall structure is, it's going to be a tube shape. And this tube-shaped organ is going to be lined with glandular tissue that secretes serous fluid.
Sorry.